The Subcommittee on the Indo-Pacific of the Foreign Affairs Committee will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to examine our existing bilateral and multilateral engagement on critical and emerging technology with our allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I want to welcome everyone to the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee's hearing entitled Protecting Emerging Technologies for Peace and Stability in the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific region is important for U.S. technology for at least two reasons. First, Chairman Xi Jinping has made technological superiority a cornerstone to the Chinese Communist Party's national and military competitiveness. In 2013, Xi said during an inspection of the Chinese Academy of Sciences that high-end science and technology is a national weapon in modern times. Since then, through his military-civil fusion and Made in China 2025 programs, the CCP has aimed to catch up and surpass the United States in technological power and strengthen the People's Liberation Army through reform and technology. Successive U.S. administrations have concluded that it is in the interest of our national security to impose costs and degrade certain capabilities for the Chinese Communist Party. Second, to maintain the United States' technological advantage, we must work with other like-minded and technologically advanced countries, like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. These are 3 of the top 10 countries in the world with that expertise. We must cooperate with these countries on research and development, manufacturing, and implementation of high-end technology. At the same time, like-minded countries need to work with us to ensure the technology we share or jointly develop do not end up in the hands of the CCP. For example, I was proud to introduce the Koala Act. This provides a defense technology trade exemption for one of our closest allies in the region, Australia. The Koala Act contributed significantly to the final AUKUS implementation law that passed in the fiscal year 2024 NDAA. The cooperation of this magnitude will help to deter the Chinese and advance our national security, but only if state implements the law correctly and provides the exemption to which the Australians are clearly eligible for. Today's hearing will tackle these issues. We will discuss several tools today that are vital to ensuring our collective technologies do not fall into the hands of the CCP, like export controls, sanctions, and research security. We will also look at existing and proposed bilateral and plurilateral structures that can work together to reduce regulatory barriers to technology cooperation and to harmonize export controls. So I look forward to our fruitful discussion on what more we and our allies and partners can do on these fronts. In just a few days, I will be leading a bipartisan CODEL to Singapore, Malaysia, and Vietnam to discuss PRC influence in the region, South China Sea issues, and technology cooperation. In preparation for this trip, I would particularly like to hear from our witnesses what Southeast Asian countries are doing to protect critical technologies from the hands of the CCP, and where there are opportunities for more tech cooperation with these countries. So I thank our witnesses for your willingness to testify today, and I look forward to a detailed discussion about U.S. government efforts in this regard. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, the gentleman from California, Mr. Berra, for your opening statements that you have.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kim, for holding this hearing and for your partnership on this important topic of protecting emergency technologies to ensure peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. This subcommittee hearing is a nice complement to the full committee hearing that we had earlier this morning, looking at outbound investments and how we can, protect our outbound investments, but also address the national security concerns that affect not only us, but our partners in the West. As we saw in that hearing this morning, and I think as you'll see in the subcommittee hearing, this really is not a partisan issue. This is an issue that Democrats and Republicans, both in this Congress but across administrations, understand. And whereas 2 decades ago, we would have hoped, as China built a middle class, as it developed an entrepreneurial class, that it would become a responsible member of the global economic order. Unfortunately, we've seen out of Beijing, we've seen out of Xi Jinping, particularly policies, and one that we talked about this morning was kind of the civilian military policy doctrine, which really blurs the line on that cooperation. I do want to point out and applaud the Biden administration for supercharging our export control policy in the face of the tremendous geopolitical change and challenge that we see in the Indo-Pacific. The administration's expansive export controls go further than any previous administration. And in 2022, BIS imposed unprecedented export controls to restrict the PRC from obtaining advanced computing chips, develop and maintain some supercomputers, and manufacture of advanced semiconductors. These controls were expanded this past fall. And again, I think it's a step in the right direction. I look forward to hearing the testimony of the witnesses today. Look forward to working with the chairwoman as well as the chairman and ranking member of the full subcommittee and across Congress. I think, as the chairwoman rightfully pointed out, it's not just our policies, but it is the policies of working with our like-minded, like-valued allies as we look to both protect these important investments, important infrastructures, but then also as we work with the private sector to make sure they understand, as pointed out in that civilian military policy doctrine, that they may be looking at making reasonable investments in the PRC, but how those investments may undermine our own national security. So I think Congress does have to do a job helping the private sector understand where those investments may have detrimental effects. So again, look forward to hearing from the witnesses, and with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. And we're pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this very important topic. Mr. Nathan Fick is the Ambassador at Large for the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy at the U.S. State Department. Mr. C.S. Kong, Elliot Kong, is the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of International Security and Nonproliferation at the Department of State. Ms. Thea Rosman-Candler is the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of International Security and Nonproliferation at the State Department, Department of Commerce. Thank you for being here today. Your full statements will be made a part of the record, and I'll ask each of you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. So let me now recognize Ambassador Fick for your opening statement.
Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Barra, distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the Department of State, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm honored to provide an overview of our work advancing U.S. technology policy priorities globally and our efforts to strengthen U.S. technology leadership in the Indo-Pacific. At the State Department, I oversee the organizations that lead and coordinate the department's work on cyberspace, digital policy, digital freedom, and emerging technologies, the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy, known as CDP, and the Office of the Special Envoy for Critical and Emerging Technology, STEC for short. Building on years of bipartisan work to establish these organizations, Secretary Blinken launched both in 2022 as part of a comprehensive effort to consolidate our technology diplomacy efforts to upgrade and to elevate and integrate them, and to make technology issues more central to U.S. foreign policy. We thank the committee for your sustained support of this mission, particularly for the creation of a dedicated cyberspace, digital connectivity, and related technology, that's CDT for short, Foreign Assistance Fund in the recently passed 2023 State Department Authorization Act. At our core, we believe in technology's power to solve major challenges and support American prosperity and global security. As a Marine combat veteran, a technology entrepreneur and executive, and now the first person to hold this role at the State Department, I see tech innovation as an increasingly foundational source of geopolitical power, driving more and more of what is and is not possible in our foreign and national security policies. Technology is increasingly the game, and we must engage in this geopolitical competition boldly and with urgency on behalf of our values and our interests. We face well-resourced and technologically capable competitors and adversaries who possess authoritarian visions and use long-term, technology-based strategies to advance those aspirations. These competitors most notably include the PRC, which wields all elements of national power to try to bend the rules-based international order in its favor, to build economic and technical dependencies, and to lock in long-term influence. A key tenet of our work is building digital solidarity with allies and partners across a growing set of technology topics of high geopolitical significance, including innovation and industry leadership, cyber incident response capacity building, information and communication technology, supply chain diversification, trusted digital infrastructure project support, and the rights-respecting uses of technology. These efforts cut across the digital ecosystem, from basic cybersecurity protections to 5G networks to other aspects of digital infrastructure, including data centers, low Earth orbit satellites, and undersea cables, as well as to the new generation of enabling technologies, including AI. Foreign assistance is an important element of our engagement on these topics. For example, we plan to leverage foreign assistance funding to support a major undersea cable and cybersecurity resilience project together with Australia and private sector partners to connect strategically important Pacific Island countries to trusted digital infrastructure. And I will be in the region next week, I think just shortly after you, Chairwoman Kim, to build on this work. The creation of the dedicated Foreign Assistance Fund in the State Auth is an important step in streamlining work like this Pacific Island project, providing the U.S. with the agility to move at the speed of technology and, importantly, also at the speed of our competitors. Funding this assistance instrument will be critical to making long-term investments in Indo-Pacific stability. More broadly, we've launched high-level dialogues on critical and emerging tech with Singapore, the Republic of Korea, and India, together with White House and interagency partners. We also engage closely, of course, with our Quad partners on critical and emerging technologies and the cybersecurity of our critical infrastructure. We support elements of AUKUS with Australia and the United Kingdom. We're strengthening U.S. diplomatic capabilities internally, and I don't want to lose sight of this, with the goal of having a trained cyber and digital officer in every U.S. mission around the world by the end of next year. The U.S., thanks to our robust innovation economy, is the world's leading provider of cybersecurity and digital technology products and services. And the State Department works on behalf of the American people to promote stability and trusted digital ecosystems around the world. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador Vick. I now recognize Assistant Secretary Kang for your opening statement.
Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Bear, and distinguished member of the subcommittee.
Your mic on, please.
It's on. Thank you for inviting me to testify today on this very important topic. The mission of the State Department's Bureau of International Security and Nonproliferation, known as ISN, is to prevent, protect, and promote. We prevent the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, WMD. We protect critical and emerging technologies, such as AI, which can be used to develop or improve WMD. Their protection stems from national security concerns, not economic competitiveness. To the extent that we promote, however, we promote civil nuclear cooperation. It is important that civil nuclear cooperation are conducted under the highest standard of safety, security, and nonproliferation. So we leverage diplomatic relationships, negotiate and implement nonproliferation agreements and treaties, offer capacity building programs, and work multilaterally on export controls and sanctions. ISN partners closely with the Office of the Special Envoy for Critical and Emerging Technology and the Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy. and we work hand in glove with the National Security Council and the interagency. ISN also has a deep and long-standing partnership with the intelligence community. For almost a decade, ISN has been sounding the alarm about the Chinese Communist Party's growing ambition to develop the PLA through its civil-military fusion strategy, MCF for short. This MCF strategy, which merges the PRCs and commercial innovation ecosystem, decreases our confidence in the ability to ensure that U.S. technologies exported to PRC will be used only for legitimate civilian uses. So we have been coordinating with the interagency and especially with our indispensable partner, the Commerce Department's BIS, to counter CCP's MCF strategy. This partnership includes developing advanced semiconductor export restrictions to the PRC, such as the October 2022 and October 23 rules on AI-enabling chips and chip manufacturing equipment. And as diplomats, ISN worked tirelessly with our allies and partners on export control diplomacy, some of which we do not discuss beyond our confidential diplomatic exchanges. Thanks to the work of this committee and a strong bipartisan support in Congress, the CHIPS Act and its International Technology Security and Innovation Fund, known as ITSE, are making a profound contribution to this diplomatic effort. With ITSE, we are developing the Semiconductor Protect Fusion Cell to counter MCF by providing access to open source data to better recognize and raise awareness of the problematic PRC end users and disrupt any illicit activities. ISN also manages other foreign assistance programs to strengthen regional regulatory systems, improve implementation and enforcement measures, and enhance research security among partners. While PRC looms large in our work, we are also concerned with Russia. As Russia's illegal war in Ukraine continues, we are tackling Russia's growing ties with the DPRK. Just last week, in response to the deliveries of DPRK's military equipment and munition to Russia, ISN used its sanctions authority to block proliferation networks facilitating these transfers. And we are vigilant about what Russia may be providing to the DPRK in exchange. After all, nothing is free. Everything has to be paid for. Chairwoman Kim, we recognize that critical emerging technologies have global supply chains. Hence, ISN takes a global approach to protecting these technologies, including engaging like-minded partners in multilateral diplomatic efforts and expanding bilateral cooperation. However, the Indo-Pacific is particularly important, a region rich with technology innovators and critical suppliers. So ISN is deeply involved in the larger effort to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific by promoting cooperation with our allies and partners. Indeed, ISN's critical work on AUKUS Pillar 1, a game-changing partnership, exemplifies our commitment to the region. Thank you again for inviting me to testify today. I look forward to your question.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Kang. I now recognize Assistant Secretary Candler for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Bera, distinguished members of this committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify about the Biden-Harris administration's ongoing efforts at the Commerce Department's Bureau of Industry and Security, or BIS, to advance U.S. national security and foreign policy interests, protecting emerging technologies for peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. I appreciate the opportunity to work with you and your teams on these critical issues to ensure that we're effectively countering China's military modernization and human rights abuses, and identifying and controlling technologies critical to protecting our national security, while we also degrade Russia's ability to wage war in Ukraine. We cannot accomplish these goals without collaboration with allies and partners on multilateral export controls and the expansion of international technology partnerships. Through our Bureau's licensing officers, trade data and industry analysts, and our growing international policy and intelligence analysis teams, we identify sensitive U.S. technologies that would give our adversaries an advantage, and we develop the policies and strategies to protect such technologies. We assess the availability of foreign technology and the effectiveness of our controls, as well as foreign end users that require extra scrutiny. We then adopt controls that address both technology and end users. Technology controls are based on the performance specifications of an item. The countrywide controls we put in place on advanced semiconductors and semiconductor manufacturing equipment to China are an example of these technology controls. End user controls deny items to particular entities. We impose these controls through additions to our entity list when there are specific and articulable facts that an entity is engaged in activities contrary to U.S. national security or foreign policy interests. Of the 787 China-based entities currently on the entity list, 303, more than a third, have been added in this administration. Many in the last 2 years have been added for companies that are shipping items to Russia. For approximately 70 years, a foundation of U.S. dual-use export controls has been the government's close work with allies and partners to coordinate our policies to control the spread of weapons of mass destruction and conventional weapons. These efforts are steered through 4 multilateral regimes, and for most of the world, and certain of our partners, these regimes are so intrinsic to global export control systems that those countries' domestic laws may not conceive of controls adopted through any other mechanism. Through technical expert meetings and other international engagements, we at the Bureau of Industry and Security are committed to the important efforts of these regimes. With our interagency partners, including the State Department, BIS has developed countless proposals over the years to add new items, remove items, and modify parameters of the control lists. At the same time, we recognize that the world has changed dramatically since establishment of these regimes after the Cold War. The digital revolution complicates strategies built around the control of tangible goods. In this difficult moment, we are fortunate to have vibrant export controls collaborations, particularly with the partners in the Indo-Pacific. They have joined us in the Global Export Control Coalition of 39 major economies that have adopted substantially similar controls on Russia following Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine, an effort that has reinvigorated our connections with export control counterparts in the Indo-Pacific and Europe. We also welcome partner engagement in safeguarding our core technologies, particularly in the face of China's challenges to global peace and security, including through the military-civil fusion strategy exacerbated by China's form of government, in which the government can coerce companies to act contrary to their interest when it's in the government's interest. Through export controls, we are working to cultivate trusted ecosystems that will allow emerging technologies to develop in a safe space. Export controls set a clear line about who we trust when it comes to dual-use technologies. Through these ecosystems, partners that share our values, our commitment to a rules-based order, and our security outlook benefit from trade in these technologies, while others do not. In the Indo-Pacific, our partnerships are key to fostering trusted technology ecosystems, combating economic coercion, and preventing the misuse of sensitive technologies to undermine our national security and that of our allies and partners. We maintain a host of formal and informal international engagements with other implementing agencies across the region, which I look forward to discussing with you during this hearing. U.S. export controls have been and will always be most effective when deployed in conjunction with those of governments that share our values. As technology evolves, we will protect our national security by coordinating with our closest allies and partners, ensuring that the fruits of advanced technologies are applied to our shared security and prosperity. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Candler. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. And I want to start by saying that last year, the administration decided to remove the Chinese Ministry of Public Security's Institute of Forensic Science, IFS, from the Commerce Entity List So, Ms. Candler, since you were before our Oversight and Accountability Subcommittee and testified recently, can you explain to us why IFS was added to the entity list to begin with?
Congresswoman, I appreciate your concern about this entity and its activities in China, its placement on our entity list. I can't speak specifically to an entity beyond the information that's in the public record. We have national security concerns and foreign policy concerns associated with the entities
my
on the entity list.
understanding, it was IFS was added due to their egregious abuse of the Uyghur Muslims through genomics. So, Ms. Candler and Mr. Kong, please chime in. Can you explain to us the interagency process that led to the decision to remove IFS from the entity list?
Congresswoman, it's very important to us at the Commerce Department to have, our regulations require that we have unanimous interagency agreement whenever an entity is removed from the entity list. It's very important to us that we have the equities of all 4 departments that participate in the End User Review Committee, that's Commerce, Defense, Energy, and State, and that we consider the equities of all 4 of those agencies whenever an entity is removed from our list.
Mr. Kong, do you want to add to that briefly?
Yes. What I could add is that tackling fentanyl, which has been declared a national emergency by the president, and it is one of the top administration priority to get a handle on a problem, a crisis that kills up to more than 100,000 ordinary Americans. And removing IFS allowed us to get better cooperation from China.
Can we talk about that just a little bit? I want to know exactly when the decision was made to remove IFS. Like, how far in advance was that decided from the time President Biden met with Xi Jinping in San Francisco, November of last year? I know they had a conversation, they talked about establishing a working group to tackle the fentanyl and all that, but I'm specifically interested in knowing when that decision was made.
Congresswoman, we at the Commerce Department do run the process for the End User Review Committee, and I should note that we have around 100 entities on the entity list that are related to human rights abuses in Xinjiang specifically. We also have entities on the entity list that are there for other human rights abuses in China. Specifically as to the timing, that's something that is in the interagency process, and I'd be happy to get back to you if within the bounds of our legal authorities of what we can provide.
Well, I want to emphasize, as you mentioned, the human rights should not be a bargaining chip to secure high-level meetings with the CCP. Rather, it should be the priority of meetings with our CCP counterparts. Let me move on. You know, we have a series of multilateral engagements with our partners and allies in the Indo-Pacific on technology issues, including the Quad Working Group on Critical and Emerging Technology and the ASEAN Committee on Science, Technology, and Innovation. Ambassador Fig, this is something that I think you can speak to. Do we have the diplomatic structures to engage in discussions at the working group level on specific sectors of technology cooperation? If so, what sectors have a stronger diplomatic framework or which are lacking?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. I believe that the creation of these new organizations at the State Department is an effort on our part to do exactly what I believe you're asking, which is ensure that we have the organization, the expertise, and the senior representation to engage with our counterparts bilaterally and multilaterally on these topics everywhere of geopolitical significance to the United States. I will be representing us, for example, at the ASEAN Digital Ministerial Meeting in Singapore in a couple of weeks. And the areas where we have the closest cooperation include cybersecurity capacity building, ensuring.
Will you be leading our discussions on our end on all of these the structural engagements?
I'm not sure that I can categorically say all, but I do represent us on the digital ministerial track with ASEAN, the G20, the G7, and other similar organizations. Yes.
Well, thank you. My time's up. So now let me recognize Ranking Member Bera for 5 minutes of questioning.
Great, thanks, Chairwoman. And maybe this is a question for Ambassador Fick. Certainly the focus of this subcommittee hearing is outbound investment, export controls on critical technologies. An area that I've been thinking about a little bit, which I think is a bit harder to get a grasp on, but I think, Ambassador Fick, with your experience in the private sector and the technology sector, should we as Congress be thinking about, where funding for venture companies come from? And if, let's say the PRC is funding dollars in venture that are then going to U.S. startup companies that are looking at critical technology, like how do we track that? How should we think about that? Because that also seems to be an area of potential vulnerability where, it looks like a U.S. startup is working on this, but outside investors could, is that an area we should be spending time thinking about, and how should we think about that?
Congressman, it's a bit outside the remit of my current role, but I did spend 10 years as an operating partner at a venture firm, and so bring some perspective to the question. I think it's important that we think about these investment issues, both inbound and outbound, and certainly PRC or other investment dollars as limited partners into these funds usually come with strings attached around required partnerships or technology transfer. And so a congressional role in shining a light on that, making it clear, and encouraging investors in the United States to look a layer or two deeper would, in fact, make us more secure.
Ms. Kedler.
Thank you. This is a really important topic to be discussing. I was out in Silicon Valley last fall having conversations exactly on this topic, making sure that we have educated nascent U.S. startups about export controls. Because no matter where the money's coming from, the technology flow is controlled under export controls, depending on the nature of the technology or the end recipient of the technology. So those laws remain in place as implemented by Commerce with our colleagues, regardless of who is investing in the technologies. Now, I completely agree that we should be very concerned about whether strings are attached, and that's certainly something that we can look out also in the CFIUS context, when you have foreign enterprises acquiring U.S. entities. Here it's a little bit harder to see, but our export controls will apply to the technology regardless. And we have a responsibility at Commerce, which we're deeply engaged in, to educate all sorts of enterprises, small, medium, well-established, nascent, about those controls.
And let me ask a similar question on outbound investment. I think what I called the civilian-military policy doctrine, I think you guys were calling the military-civilian fusion policy. How do we, legitimately U.S. companies, U.S. investors may be looking for investment opportunities overseas and so forth. And, I asked this question earlier today. How should we think about, again, legitimate investment, but not necessarily understanding that that investment in a foreign entity, let's say an entity in the PRC, then potentially is developing technologies, et cetera, recruiting talent that may inadvertently undermine U.S. national security interests? Again, yes, please.
I think export controls provide an excellent guidepost here. I share your concerns about money going into enterprises that may be working on indigenous technology that we've barred for export. And so the two issues go hand in hand in terms of the most critical technologies that we are focused on protecting. And that may be for individual companies or funds looking at investing, that may be a starting point.
Does Commerce have the authorities to restrict those funds from being invested, or are those new authorities?
We don't control the flow of money at the Commerce Department or in the Bureau of Industry and Security, but any technology would be controlled under our authorities. And I anticipate in any sort of outbound regime that it would be our technical expertise in the Bureau of Industry and Security that would be applied.
And my sense is that's that gray zone area where it's not outbound technology that's going there, but it is a startup company, in an adversary that, is drawing in external investment, but now they're working on some of those technologies indigenously. Secretary Kanger, Ambassador Fick, if you want to answer.
Yes, if I may. It is clearly a glaring gap. Export controls could do so much because it basically deals with tangible goods. And with regard to even these passive investments, but particularly in the case of venture capital, you also transfer intangible knowledge and know-how. And this gives a company in China or wherever access to U.S. origin or Western origin knowledge base. And another thing, as someone who have worked non-proliferation for over a decade, there are so many front companies that we're dealing with, seemingly appearing very legitimate with legitimate support, but they're fronting for either the military or intelligence services in the case of PRC.
Your time's up? Okay. Let me now recognize Ms. Wagner, Representative Wagner, for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Madam Chairman, and I thank our witnesses for their service. China intends to supplant the U.S. as the global leader in critical and emerging technologies at any cost: bullying, bribery, and outright IP theft. If China is allowed to achieve dominance in the technologies that will shape our future, American communities and businesses will in fact suffer. Our allies and partners also risk losing access to safe, secure infrastructure and technologies that we all rely on for communications, for transportation. It could be medical care, national security. I could go on and on about other essential industries. The Indo-Pacific region is a global center of technological expertise and advancement, and the U.S. must work in lockstep with Indo-Pacific countries to safeguard sensitive, cutting-edge technologies and reduce technological dependence on China. Assistant Secretaries Kang or Kendler, what sectors or subsectors of technology are the Indo-Pacific countries most concerned about, and how would you rate their ability to protect these technologies from adversarial nations? Where are the biggest gaps in the Indo-Pacific to protecting critical technologies?
Congresswoman, when we think about critical and emerging technologies here, we are guided primarily by the 19 categories of items that are identified by the White House in the critical and emerging technologies list. And that is, each one of those technologies is a space where we have export controls.
Where are the gaps? Where are the biggest gaps?
I think that we have room to improve, but there are no big gaps. I would not identify big gaps. I would say that we have controls in each of these spaces. Our controls are generally defined in terms of technological floors. So as innovation occurs in these areas, they are already captured. And if they're not, we are working with our allies and partners, particularly those who are members of, I'd say in this space, the Wassenaar Arrangement, which includes quite a few Indo-Pacific partners.
Well, here's a gap that I see, and Ambassador Fick, let me try this with you. Today, submarine cables transport 99% of intercontinental data. These cables are important. Is China's planning to increase, the fact that China is planning to increase its role in the development and the repair and production of undersea cables, what measures are your departments taking to undercut these plans, and which pose, I think, a serious threat and gap to the secure flow of data around the world?
Congresswoman, I agree very much with the premise of your question. I'm going to the South Pacific next week on an undersea cable project to advance trusted connectivity across the South Pacific. We I believe that when our adversaries tell us what they intend to do, we should believe them.
Yep.
We watch them run a playbook with telecom. They're running the same playbook with every other technology area, including undersea cable. Unlike in telecom, we still have a national champion manufacturer here in the United States of trusted undersea cable. We need to be careful to ensure that that company remains vibrant. And we have a comprehensive effort underway to put trusted undersea cable in place across the South Pacific.
I am very concerned about Chinese companies repairing or even having access to undersea cables owned by U.S. carriers, to be honest. Are we concerned about this?
I was recently at the cable repair depot in Sri Lanka, asking exactly those questions about the Indian Ocean. Yes, we are concerned about it. And yes, we believe that that is critical infrastructure that the U.S. needs to protect from end to end.
And let me, just to follow up again, what Indo-Pacific regions and partners are most dependent on China for undersea cable development? And how specifically is the U.S. collaborating with our partners to reduce dependence on PRC-controlled infrastructure and promote safe and secure infrastructure?
One of the best things we can do is get trusted cables deployed. That is U.S. or Japanese or French manufactured cables that are owned and operated by the hyperscale technology companies that are generally American companies. So we are working to get those projects in place with branching units that will allow the development of spurs to islands and nations where we maintain military and other relationships.
Well, these cables, as I said, they transport 99% of intercontinental data. So this is a big, big concern that we should have, especially their access and repairing. So my time has expired. I yield back to the chair.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Sherman for 5 minutes.
I want to applaud the administration for the action you've recently taken. As Mr. Fick points out, China is using all elements of national power. Their biggest element, perhaps, is their enormous trade surplus with the United States. It is over $1/3 trillion every year. And that means that it's 150% of what they spend on the People's Liberation Army. So just what they create as a trade surplus, they could increase, could finance 1.5 People's Liberation Armies. In the trade effort, we have tariffs, they have tariffs. Theirs are higher. But they also have the capacity to orally instruct their companies not to buy from the United States. We can't do that. No member of Congress is going to say, call a major company in their district and tell them who to buy from. And so we have to match with tariffs what they can do under the table. We won't. We'll continue to run a giant trade deficit. And that means that every decade, China will have an extra $3 trillion. We are not at war with China. This is not a zero-sum game. If China develops better teddy bears more efficiently, I'm happy for that. If the Chinese people live better, that's not a bad thing. We can't just have entity controls because you can create a front company, as Mr. Kang points out. They can create a startup that is as sinless as a newborn babe, and we'd have no reason to sanction that individual company. Technology is not, as Mr. Kang points out, not just a product that we can control. It's know-how, it's inspiration, it's direction for research. Want to illustrate this, that it's important what areas we focus on. If China has a big ship and we need somebody to carry our cargo, fine. And that means it's in the interests of the American shipper or the insurer to give them ideas on how to be more effective at ocean commerce. Fine. But we had a situation also in transportation, but not taking our product from one port to another, but taking it into our satellites into space, where American companies who own satellites or who insured the launch gave them ideas on how to have better rockets. So we have to look at every relationship, particularly those that involve consulting. I want to urge some of my colleagues to look at a number of pieces of legislation. Mr. Van Drew and I have the Country of Origin Labeling Requirements Act because a lot of people want to see where something is made, which is fine if you're in the store. It's right on the box. What if you buy from Amazon? You have no idea. What are you going to do? Ship the product back? You open the package and it's made in a country you don't want to patronize. We need to get our companies to report to their shareholders what they're doing to reduce their China risk. And as I said at this morning's hearing, we need to end the capital gains allowance for investment in China. Mr. Fisk, you're our digital policy special ambassador. One thing I'm worried about is digital misinformation from China. One of their best tools for that is TikTok. It's my understanding that while we monitor other sources of digital disinformation, the relevant bureau, the Global Engagement Center in the State Department, doesn't monitor TikTok because you can't have it on a government computer. What are we going to do so that we monitor what's going on TikTok? I'm confident that we have the technical expertise to make sure that one particular computer at the State Department doesn't give them access to the rest. When are we going to start monitoring TikTok's disinformation?
Congressman, I believe I've said in previous testimony that I am the least popular parent in my children's middle school because of my stated views on TikTok. I do believe that it represents...
We've got to monitor it. When is the State Department going to start monitoring it?
I can consult with my colleagues in the Global Engagement Center, and we can get an answer
And
back
could
to
you furnish for this committee a statement as to whether we're monitoring it as we do other social media, or whether we've abandoned that? And don't tell us, well, there's an executive order to say don't put it on a government computer. I'm sure we could allow it to be on one unconnected, air-gap government computer.
I'm confident that we can get back to you in a question for the record in detail on that.
And then, Ms. Kendler, there's a tendency to think that in export controls, well, if we say no to the export, all we're doing is hurting corporate profits. And so all the national security interests are on one side. I'd admonish you two things. When we say no, that means some other company in some other country says yes. And that builds that capacity. And when we say yes, it goes to an American company that builds our capacity. And second, when your department acts slowly and then ultimately approves something, but it's too late because the business has gone elsewhere, we've lost on all fronts. So it is saying no or delaying is not without national security risk. Of course, saying yes the wrong time is what you're most likely to be criticized for. I yield back.
Let me now recognize Representative Davidson for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairwoman. It's an incredibly important hearing, and I'm glad to see that we can have administration witnesses because this is a topic that's incredibly important. Obviously, Republican promises on a whole host of things conflict with some of the Biden administration promises. And in this area, I'm encouraged to see that we're aligned. You know, Ambassador Fick, I'm encouraged by your appointment and, frankly, by your credentials. You're one of a handful of private sector people, non-academia, people that have worked in capitalism, not in think tanks or academia, that is part of the administration. So, and credited as one of the most innovative thinkers in the market. So glad to see you're there. When you think about this space, in 2018, the United States decided to update the Foreign Investment Risk Reduction Modernization Act, kind of framework for foreign investment into the United States. And we did touch on the idea of outbound investment. Where are the voids that you're most concerned about?
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate the your gracious words. I think that the specifics of inbound and outbound investment do fall outside my remit, so I would want to yield to colleagues who are perhaps closer to that particular issue. and restate what I did say earlier, which is I think that we need to have attention on both sides. And I think that there's more that we can do in this world where so many of the innovative technologies that are increasingly contributing to national power are being developed by companies that, frankly, are very small or may not exist today. And they're going to change the landscape very quickly. But I would defer to colleagues on the specifics.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. We have to avoid a situation where U.S. investments are supporting Chinese military modernization. We cannot permit the intelligence, the military technology of China to be built on U.S. funding. That would undermine our national security and foreign policy interests. And so-
Wholeheartedly agree. Prior to being in Congress, I was in manufacturing. This is a little bit outside your area, but fundamentally, doesn't our whole trade policy facilitate that?
Congressman, our export controls are calibrated and tailored for advanced technologies to China, the technologies that China cannot get elsewhere. That
I mean, the entire industrial base is at risk. I mean, we saw that during COVID. You look at whether it's vitamins or base chemicals. I mean, fundamentally, we have a real supply chain risk problem, don't we?
We're very focused on our supply chain issues and U.S. technological leadership in the supply chain. We are on the brink of issuing a survey to poll the industry about legacy semiconductor chips, for example, as an area where we need more information about our supply chain, and that is certainly connected to national security. Our export controls are focused on national security and foreign policy interests. Last fall, we published an update to our artificial intelligence semiconductor chip rule to make sure that the chips, the most advanced chips, which are made using U.S. technology, are not feeding the Chinese military, that are not being used for AI modeling of hypersonic missiles.
I thank you for that, and certainly that's important. I haven't been part of the debate on the CHIPS Act that we passed that in theory was supposed to strengthen the U.S. supply chain and in a way weaken China's or limit their access to the most innovative chips. I do worry about some of the unintended consequences. One of the companies in my congressional district is Silfex. They're a large employer in the region, but fundamentally they're supplying base material, silicon wafers, which is more of a commodity. And they're at risk of losing substantial employment because they can't export those things. China's doing fine on commodity-grade chips, so how do we strike the balance and not, cause more harm to domestic manufacturers than we're intending? And I think the other thing is, when you talk about, Ambassador, you mentioned small companies. When you talk about the biggest companies, a lot of times they'll just create a different entity offshore and do the same thing. So how do we capture that with our current look at outbound investment?
Congressman, I am not really in a position to talk about outbound investment. In the export controls context, speaking of the AI chips rule, we actually last October took that issue on directly. We expanded our controls to deal with third countries that might be providing an opportunity for China to receive the chips that we've controlled through diversion or evasion of our controls. And so we established a license requirement for third countries that we thought might be susceptible to.
What about domestic manufacturers like Silfex? What are we doing for those guys?
Congressman, I don't want to speak about a particular company here, but I'd be happy to follow up with you and your team about.
Would greatly appreciate it, because I think we're causing some unintended consequences, or at least I hope they're unintended. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Andy Kim for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the three of you for coming before us to be able to have this conversation. Assistant Secretary Kendler, I wanted to start with you. In your opening remarks, you talked about sort of our partnership globally, especially with partners in the Indo-Pacific, and you were making reference about some of the progress that we made, especially vis-a-vis the challenges we face with Russia. I wanted to see if you can just expand on it a little more. I want to get a little bit more granularity from you, just what has gotten better, stronger in that capacity, and what have we seen of that progress that might be transferable or applicable to the challenges that we face vis-a-vis China right now?
I appreciate that question quite a bit, Congressman Kim. It's been a core focus of our work over the last 2 years since Russia's further invasion of Ukraine. We, working with other implementing agencies around the world, 39 major global economies coming together to adopt substantially aligned measures towards Russia, Belarus, and to a degree Iran as well, to keep the technologies that Russia and their allies need from reaching them. They need U.S. technologies. They don't have indigenous semiconductor manufacturing, for example. They must buy chips from outside Russia. That's just one example of a host of technologies that Russia requires to wage war. So by building this coalition and maintaining this coalition, which has required an enormous amount of effort, we've established new working level connections, new senior level connections between all of the implementing agencies associated with these substantially aligned controls, which enable us to talk about issues beyond Russia. Emerging technologies is an area where we're able to say, well, how are you dealing with this issue? And share how we're dealing with the issue on a very practical level. And that can certainly carry over into any other space. We welcome conversations and are eager to have them.
Yeah.
Our main partners in that effort have included Japan and Korea, particularly. Of course, the EU and the UK are there as well. But it's a great mechanism for furthering very practical cooperation.
Yeah, thank you for that. Assistant Secretary Kang, I want to bring you into this conversation here, because especially with the insights that you have. We talked about some of those partners, South Korea, Japan, others that have a lot more experience in this. But what we also know is in the Indo-Pacific, there are actually a lot of partners, though, that don't have as much of that experience and that infrastructure in terms of a robust export control, regulatory, and enforcement system. So I guess I wanted to just get a sense from you. How are we trying to help build up that type of capability, that technical aspects in terms of assistance or trainings or other aspects? Is that something that we should be thinking about more to just try to lift that baseline up? It's good that we're doing it with certain partners that already have some of that capabilities, but I just feel like there's sort of a weak link situation here where we need to try to figure out how to kind of raise all boats there. So what are your thoughts in terms of that?
Exactly. I agree with everything that Assistant Secretary Kendall has said about the working in coalition, and certainly the cooperation that we have engaged together to counter Russia could be transferable with regard to dealing with China. But there is a serious capacity issue with regard to implementation, administration. Some countries in the region do not have basic strategic trade laws. And another priority is also given the trade flows. So many of the countries, the number one country they trade with is China. So there's also the political will, how much to cooperate in this venture. So we are engaging diplomatically alongside our implementing partners from other agencies to engage at the highest leadership, political leadership, to highlight why it is in their interest to have a strong export control system, that it will actually build their prosperity by having a reliable and trusted network of suppliers and buyers. So we are utilizing the bipartisan support that you have given us with regard to our native funding, and also in the context of the CHIPS Act, the ITSE fund. Particularly, we're focusing on semiconductor packaging in Southeast Asia. So those are extremely valuable in building that capacity.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think that's absolutely key, is just this coalition building. Ambassador Fay, I just want to give you the last word here, just from some of your reactions to this, and just how you think we can try to make sure that this is not some weak link in this broader effort that we have.
Congressman, I think one of the most pernicious terms in international technology diplomacy is digital sovereignty, and the idea that any country can go it alone on these issues. Yeah. And so it reminds me of those broadsides from the American Revolution that said, we hang together or we surely hang separately. These are issues where we need to hang together with our allies and partners. as we look at the stated intent of our geopolitical competitors and adversaries, especially the PRC and Russia and China, Iran.
Just,
and
I'll just say
DPRK.
here, as I'm running low, it's just let's make sure we're getting to follow-on conversations about some of these other countries that we should be engaged. Sometimes we talk too much about some of the ones that are working the best, but let's try to figure out how to engage on some of these others. Thank
Point
you, and
taken.
I yield back.
Thank you. Let me now recognize Representative Andy Barr for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Kim. And let me follow up with Assistant Secretary Kindler on Chair Kim's questioning about the Institute of Forensic Science. Now, just for everybody watching, this is, again, the Chinese Ministry of Public Security's Institute of Forensic Science. And it was at one time added to the Commerce Entity List. And then there was a decision that was made to remove IFS from the entity list. And again, for everybody watching, what is IFS? IFS was originally added to the entity list due to their egregious abuse of the Uyghur Muslims through horrific genetic testing activities that echo the various crimes against humanity undertaken by Nazi Germany. IFS was removed from Commerce's entity list. Now, Assistant Secretary Kindler, I'm not suggesting this was your decision or even Undersecretary Estevez's decision. And I know you respond to Secretary Raimondo, not the State Department. But I want to know from you, to the best of your understanding, did the State Department direct BIS to remove this horrible group, IFS, from the entity list?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Each agency that participates in the End-User Review Committee has an equal vote. State Department's vote, Commerce Department's vote, they carry the same weight.
So Commerce is equally culpable as the State Department in the decision to remove IFS from the entity list. This Chinese entity that engages in genetic testing reminiscent of Nazi Germany.
Congressman, I am the granddaughter of a survivor.
I know.
What I can tell you is that human rights and fentanyl, preventing deaths from fentanyl, are both deeply important issues for this administration.
What did
And
we
when
get? What did the administration get from China, from the Chinese Communist Party, for removing this entity from the export control entity list? What did we get?
Given the national security imperative for handling the fentanyl precursors coming into this country, we were comfortable taking the step to delist IFS. It became clear that including IFS on the entity list, it inhibited counter-narcotic action by China.
When was it removed from the list?
I believe, I don't have the exact date, November of this year,
And
of last
have
year.
we seen, in the time since it was removed, have we seen any material enhanced cooperation from China on fentanyl?
I'll defer to my colleague at the State Department on that answer.
I could speak to that briefly. I understand there's been really ramped up enforcement measures by the Chinese, and they also promulgated regulation, pushed out further regulating trade in fentanyl precursors.
See, here's what I don't understand. Why we're always chasing diplomacy from a position of weakness. Why are we removing bad actors from our entities list and our sanctions list? Why don't we negotiate from a position of strength? Why don't we sanction? Why don't we impose more export controls on bad actors instead of making upfront concessions with the hope that China will somehow change its behavior down the road? That's what I don't like about this diplomatic approach. It is negotiating from a position of weakness. Do you have a response to that?
If I may, as a career civil servant, serving on multiple presidential administration, I see bipartisan consensus regard to China. I think all of us see China for what it is. And what the decisions we make may be tactical in nature, and there are maybe trade-offs that we have to make. But I see total consistency. Particularly, I served also in the Trump administration and this administration.
Well, reclaiming my time, if we want to get tough on China and their peddling of the ingredients into fentanyl, exploiting our open southern border, and killing our people, poisoning our people with fentanyl, and that happens a lot in Kentucky, in my home state, unfortunately, with components from mainland China. Why don't we sanction? Why doesn't the administration support my bill that would sanction these Chinese entities that are responsible for manufacturing this poison instead of taking off a genetic testing arm of the Chinese secret police from the entity list?
Congressman, I welcome the information that you have on entities in China operating to violate human rights, and we'd be pleased to work with you and your team to get that information. We use the entity list for national security and foreign policy protection, and we are eager to put entities on that have articulable and evidence-based reasons. In this instance, to protect national security, we care both about human rights and about fentanyl precursors for exactly the reasons you've identified for the people dying in Kentucky and elsewhere. And those are both priorities. Sometimes we make trade-offs to protect our national security. And
I see, my time has expired. I don't think we have to make trade-offs. I think we need to be tough on China and not make these upfront concessions in the hopes that somehow China will change their behavior. With that, I yield.
Thank you. Representative Barr, I want to thank you for raising that issue. Just, since I've also raised that issue, I want to know if you know if the flow of fentanyl from China decreased since November, when the two leaders met and agreed, as I mentioned earlier in my line of questioning, when they decided to create the working group to address the fentanyl. I personally have not seen the decrease in fentanyl from China. Instead, my county, Orange County that I represent, which is so close to the southern border, I work closely with the local law enforcement. Orange County Sheriff Department have told me, actually there is more increase in the fentanyl coming through our southern border. So I'm not sure if you can say that we have addressed this issue. The devil's in the details. What has the working group done since November when the two leaders met, and since we have, taken the IFS off the entity list?
Chairwoman Kim, I could take that question back to those who more closely follow this issue. But just as we see problems with regard to advanced semiconductor chips popping up in Chinese companies, even after we control them, sometimes there's a lag effect, and also there's an inventory that's been pushed out. So it's an incomplete answer, but I will get back to those folks who track this more closely and get back to you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I now recognize Representative Keating for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. An area we haven't hit yet in our discussion is the nuclear area, which overlaps many of the things that your agencies are involved with. And, there's a lot going on in Europe in terms of small modular reactors. But, China, Pakistan, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Bangladesh, among others, all have nuclear programs. What are we doing through your particular agencies to deal with really very challenging issues of, number one, maintaining our competitiveness economically, our security, something that former Secretary Muniz addressed recently in terms of a collective approach, a multilateral approach that has to deal with security issues around nuclear and non-proliferation. It seems like the U.S. is, lagging many of the other countries and many other regions of the world, and I'm concerned in the Indo-Pacific, if their programs begin to expand into things like SMRs or other areas or continue to grow, we might continue to have a greater gap.
I think I'm the nuclear person in the panel. Actually, sir, we have good news. It's a combination of nuclear accidents, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, not to mention Chernobyl, has really stymied development of nuclear energy and energy technology development in the West and also in the United States. But everybody recognizes that energy security is critical to our strategic strength, and nuclear is part of that picture. And also, those who care about climate change, nuclear has to play a role as a bridging capability. And fortunately, this is playing to our strength, our innovation. And among the small modular reactors that are out in the market today, those who are most advanced and have passed the certification of the NRC, a regulatory authority in the United States that's looked upon by everybody as the gold standard with tremendous respect from abroad. Some of these reactor designs have passed muster and are ready to deploy. And we're making tremendous progress in Europe, particularly among our Eastern European NATO allies. And with situation with regard to Ukraine, the whole region is seized, and they recognize that SMR is the answer to energy independence and security. There are also great opportunities in East Asia. We have partnerships with Japan and Korea. They have invested in some of our SMR technologies, and we are working together to provide collectively those funds that are necessary to create the foundation in recipient countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, so they could proceed with nuclear pursuits safely, securely, and in non-proliferation guaranteed. So we are pouring all our resources, particularly with ISN has its own tranche of capacity building capabilities. We have this program called the FIRST, and we are heavily investing in the region.
And are we at the same time dealing with security issues as part of those discussions?
Absolutely. Security, safety has to be part of it, not just non-proliferation.
Well, quickly, I just wanted to touch on one other area that overlaps, I think, some of the transatlantic areas. You know, with the Iranian drones that we found, there were components of that from our allies that were found in the actual drones that were being given to Russia to brutally assault Ukraine. How are we dealing with the disparities that do exist between our country and our own allies on many of these fronts? What are we doing to close that gap so there's no loophole there?
So one of the things we're doing is, of course, threat awareness that a lot of these countries don't realize they are the source, the companies, whether they're front companies or actually production companies, where they're producing products that end up in these drones. I have seen these drones and touched them. These drones that were deployed in Ukraine and also in the Middle East. And they are Iranian in origin, but when you look at them, they use very basic technologies. These are difficult to control. A lot of it are commodity items in a sense. They're not quantum computing devices. So awareness is absolutely critical. And recently, at the department, I can't discuss it in further detail, we gathered together last week a group of countries to strategize together what we could do in terms of interdiction, better export control, and apply national sanctions.
Yeah, this has to be done multilaterally, not
Absolutely.
by ourselves. Thank you. I yield back.
Let me now recognize Representative Raddywagon for 5 minutes.
Talofa lava. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairwoman Kim and Ranking Member Bera, for holding this hearing. The modern globalized world is one of wonder. Modern telecommunications make it so I can speak to my family at home in American Samoa from here in Washington, D.C., almost 10,000 miles away, without any issue. That technology that allows this instant communication is mainly off-the-shelf products Now, an issue that many Pacific Island countries have is monitoring our EEZs. These off-the-shelf technologies have helped many of my neighbors in monitoring their EEZs to counter illegal activities. I have quick questions for all of you. Ambassador Fick, would you agree that advances in software and data management are creating opportunities for U.S. diplomacy to support both domestic industry and national security and foreign policy missions?
I agree very much with that.
Thank you. Secretary Kendler, if these types of items are wholly comprised of EAR 99 technology and do not touch military systems in most cases, would BIS require a license for the transfer of the item to an ally or defense treaty partner?
We do not require licenses for low-level technologies classified under EAR 99 to allies and partners unless there is an activity or an end user of concern in those countries.
So my last question is for you, Secretary Kang. Is this an area in which ISN can play a supportive role, including through export control cooperation, to build a unified, cohesive approach to the transfer of these types of systems?
Absolutely. I mean, working multilaterally is the key. We can't go it alone, so we have to create a community of interest, and we have to have common values as well. This is where human rights also comes into play in export controls. So we have created, in the auspices of Summit for Democracy, something called ECRI, Export Control and Human Rights Initiative. So all of these things come in, but all of these things have to be with the like-minded and those who share our values and common interests.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back the balance of my time.
Let me now recognize Representative Connolly for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and welcome to our panel. Ms. Kendler, you're at the Department of Commerce. Presumably, it is of concern to the Department of Commerce, as it is to the Department of State, that something like 90% of the memory chip manufacturing capacity in the world is in one place with one company in Taiwan. What concerns do we have, given Chinese saber rattling about Taiwan, with respect to the security of that critical manufactured product?
Congressman, Taiwan.
Can you get closer to the mic? It's hard to hear you.
Sorry, sir. Is
Thank
this
you.
better?
Great. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Sure. Taiwan is a very close export controls partner, and we certainly want to do what we can through export controls to make sure that Taiwan has the technology it needs.
No, that's not my question.
No.
My question is that technology is at risk because of Chinese aggression. If China crosses the Taiwan Strait, the manufacturing capacity, 90% of it, in terms of memory chips, is now in Chinese hands, not Taiwanese hands.
Congressman, through our efforts to protect national security and our foreign policy interests, we are cutting China off from the technologies it can use to wage war. And that includes our measures last fall on artificial
Ms. Kendler,
intelligence.
I'm sorry. Again, that does not address my question. My question has to do with the security of what's already there in Taiwan. What are we doing in terms of building redundancies, offshoring Taiwanese manufacturing capacity, bringing it home if necessary, to ensure that we aren't so heavily reliant on one source with one company in one place?
Congressman, this is an important issue for the Commerce Department. I've been trying to give you export controls answers, and I don't think that's suitable to the question.
Right.
So perhaps we can take this back and get you additional information from other parties at the Commerce Department who are looking at this question with a different lens.
Okay. Mr. Kang.
Perhaps
I must say, I cannot believe at this point that that's the answer of the Commerce Department of the United States government. But if that's what it is, that's what it is. It's not like this is a new issue.
I think this is where
It's a
congressional
huge security concern. Mr. King.
Yes, absolutely. So I think this is where congressional leadership is paying out. This is of course, the CHIPS Act. The whole idea is to diversify the supply chain. So we're friendshoring. If we're not bringing it back home, and we, of course, have a Taiwan company investing in the United States, a foundry. Also in Japan, that's the case as well. But also regard to packaging and other, even legacy chips, we are trying to have them in hands of our friends and allies.
Yeah.
So this is, again, because of the foresight, bipartisan support of Congress. I think that is the answer.
But
that will have to play out.
But I think, like so many other supply chain issues, we need to better understand, how did this happen? I mean, this is American-invented technology that migrates to Taiwan because we weren't willing to put the resources into it the way they were. And yeah, at the moment, it's in friendly hands. May it ever be thus. But we have to plan for the what-ifs. And, you know, China's making no secret of its designs. What's the point of view, Ambassador Fick, of the State Department from a policy point of view with respect to this?
I think an aspect of this that falls within my remit, Congressman, is working closely with my Taiwanese counterparts in an unofficial capacity to ensure that we are transferring to them lessons that we have learned in other places like Ukraine in order to strengthen deterrence and ensure that Taiwan, we maintain the status quo.
Really? So you think negotiating with Taiwan or advising Taiwan on deterrence, it protects this 90% worldwide manufacturing capability unique to Taiwan?
I think we recognize the importance, Taiwan's unique role in the global economy because of the concentration of semiconductor manufacturing. I think we're taking comprehensive steps to diversify that supply chain outside Taiwan, part of it in the United States, part of it in friendly countries. And we are clearly trying to buy as much time as we can in order to develop and mature those alternatives. And that involves strengthening deterrence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony and the members for asking your questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions, and I do too, for your witness responses, and I'll ask you to respond those in writing. We cannot allow the Chinese Communist Party to dictate how critical and emerging technologies are developed and used. Xi Jinping cannot be trusted, and all technology developed under his regime can and will be used for human rights abuses and military aggression. It is therefore of the utmost importance that we invest in our own technological base, that we ensure all U.S.-developed technology is protected, that the U.S. and like-minded allies and partners are setting the rules of the road for the use of technology worldwide, and that we are able to jointly develop and manufacture critical technologies efficiently. It's important to recall that the United States established NATO after the end of World War II. It's also created COCOM, the Coordination Committee for Multilateral Export Controls. The concept was simple. If the United States is going to guarantee the security of our allies, then our allies would help deny the export of strategic technology to an adversary. And fast forward, today, an adversary is inside our export control regimes. In some respects, we don't need novel solutions to our technology transfer problem. Instead, we need to go back to what worked. Small groups of partners and allies denying our adversaries access to strategic technology. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. It is clear that we have much more work to do to be able to seamlessly develop critical and emerging technologies with our allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific, and to protect these technologies from authoritarian adversaries. So I look forward to continuing our work with each of you to fill these gaps and maintain our U.S. technological superiority. Let's see. In closing, pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitation. So without objection, the committee now stand adjourned.